So yesterday was Jim Ryan's turn to talk in the FTC versus Microsoft case, and he didn't show up in person, but he had a 70-minute long video deposition, and that was played, and we got more information as to where Jim Ryan and Sony stand on this entire thing and why they want this deal blocked. So let's just jump into what Jim Ryan said during this video deposition. First of all, he's talking about PlayStation and Xbox and asking why games resonate better in the United States versus outside of the country. Jim Ryan says here, many of their games involve an element of shooting and online multiplayer, both of which typically are more popular in the US than they are outside of the US. And I guess they're just kind of referencing to the fact that Call of Duty is going to be a multiplayer first-person shooter, a massive game, the biggest game in video games, essentially. So this is why it's going to be a big game to go over to the Xbox platform, where they have most of their market share. It's where they are the strongest, obviously, in the United States and in North America. Now, one of the biggest things people are continuously talking about throughout this entire battle is, why isn't the Nintendo Switch included in these discussions? And I think it's absurd, because the Nintendo Switch is part of this generation of consoles, whether we like it or not. Even though it did release back in 2017, it is a part of it, and it is continuously selling extremely well, continuously being very competitive versus the Xbox and the PlayStation. I mean, we just saw the most recent Nintendo Direct, and you could argue it was one of the better shows so far this year. I would say it was just slightly behind the Xbox showcase, especially if you are a Nintendo fan, with some of the stuff that they did announce. I enjoyed it, and I would say it was far better than the PlayStation showcase. So Nintendo is still going very strong with an older console on weaker hardware. And Jim Ryan talks about this, saying, we consider Nintendo to participate in different market segments to Xbox and PlayStation, saying Nintendo's hardware technology is of much less sophisticated nature to PlayStation or Xbox. Its hardware typically retails for a cheaper price, and its audience is aimed rather younger. Now, when it comes to the cheaper price thing, it's just wrong. That's not factual, because you look at the Xbox Series S, the price of that versus the price of the Nintendo Switch, and they are in the exact same market from a price standpoint. So the whole price thing isn't even an argument that can be used. Of course, it is cheaper technology. I'll agree with that. It is older technology, 100%, but it is still getting a lot of these games that are coming out on other platforms, third-party games. They have a huge third-party library this year, and it's still selling like crazy. Plus, it also has all of the first-party Nintendo stuff that tends to do better than first-party anywhere else. Now, they say here, why is it beneficial to have third-party exclusives on PlayStation? And Jim Ryan talks about that type of stuff, and talks about Bethesda games, and says, and asked how he feels about the Bethesda games not being on PlayStation. He says, I think that pretty much every Bethesda game was multi-platform prior to the acquisition, and that the sign an exclusivity deal for PlayStation because development efforts required to make the game reduces. That's why they go out and try to get those third-party deals. Now, that's obviously not the main reason. The main reason is to get people to go out and buy a PS5 over an Xbox. And we saw what Phil Spencer thought about PlayStation's deals, of them being a hostile competitor, and basically doing whatever they can to make sure games do not show up on the Xbox platform. And I would say, more so than anything, that is why they sign these third-party deals. You look at the consoles today, and the development between them, I don't think is that much different. They're both using very similar pieces within the console itself, both AMD, very similar SoCs in terms of power between the GPU and the CPU and the SSDs and all that type of stuff. So I can't believe that it is that much more difficult to develop for both consoles than just focusing on one of them. This isn't like it was even just back at the PS3 and the Xbox 360, where you had the cell architecture from PlayStation, then you had the Xbox 360. They were completely different, and that was one of the things that did play out throughout that generation, where it took a while for developers to kind of understand how to use the cell processor on the PlayStation 3 and get the most out of it. Now, he goes here talking about the PlayStation 6. We know this is something that PlayStation, Jim Ryan, they are concerned about, having to share information about their upcoming consoles for Call of Duty, which will go directly to Microsoft and give them a business intel on what PlayStation is planning to bring out. And this is what Jim Ryan says about this. He says, we simply could not run the risk of a company that was owned by a direct competitor having access to that information. And then he was asked about Sony making the decision to delay supplying PS5 dev kits to Microsoft for Minecraft. And he says, the development kits allow developers to have visibility and to work on the feature set that our new console will deploy. A developer may bring its content to the new platform later than would otherwise be the case. The commercial risk associated with the knowledge of these feature sets leaking to our principal competitors is not something we'd rely on any contract to enforce. So they just don't trust putting out that information. And honestly, out of all of the things that Jim Ryan talks about and all the things that PlayStation talks about, I can actually understand this one. I feel like Xbox would be in the exact same boat. They probably don't want to provide confidential information to their direct competitor about their upcoming console, their upcoming technology, because you want to have that competitive advantage. We saw the competitive advantage play out at the beginning of this generation in terms of what the excitement over with the Xbox Series X, because it was more powerful with the more teraflops. It had incorporated all of the backwards compatibility stuff and all of the things with the RDNA 2 technology. All of those things were competitive advantages at that time for Xbox that PlayStation didn't see coming. And we know they didn't see it coming because we saw PlayStation pivot right away after the Xbox Series X came out, specifically on the whole backwards compatibility thing, making sure PS4 games were working on the PlayStation 5. I actually believe that they weren't even going to have PS4 games working on the PS5 if Xbox hadn't announced just the robust backwards compatibility program with the Xbox Series X and S. And I think those types of things, if you get that information early, you can plan for that before you make any announcements and avoid any backpedaling, because they were getting called out for that type of stuff with the release of these consoles. And then you even think about all the way back to the Xbox One generation, how Xbox had to backpedal on a lot of their information and a lot of their decisions with that console. And if they would have seen the PS4 previously to announcing all of the Xbox One stuff and the entire reception around that, they probably wouldn't have even announced those things originally. So it is important to keep this confidential information about your upcoming products and technology close to your chest and not give it to your direct competitor. So I can actually understand that one from a PlayStation perspective. And then next up, they talk about Jim Ryan and Phil Spencer email. It says Xbox chief Phil Spencer sends Jim Ryan a commitment list of games last year that would remain on PlayStation after the proposed Activision Blizzard deal closes. And the list included Overwatch, but not Overwatch 2. And it says here, other Activision games on PlayStation must be sufficiently broad to fully align with gamers' expectations. That's what Jim Ryan said in an email. And he called it not a meaningful list. So he was not happy with the games that were in that list that Phil Spencer provided that would be remaining on PlayStation, which leads to them doing whatever they can to try and block this deal. Now, they say Sony's alarm bells started ringing in August. Apparently, Jim Ryan says on August 26, 2022, from Phil Spencer, I guess an email, he says, really set alarm bells ringing inside of Sony. Up until that point, Sony hadn't negotiated an access agreement. Microsoft argues Sony didn't have any initial concerns after a January 31st proposal email and calls to the Sony CEO and Jim Ryan. Now, here's what Jim says. I wasn't particularly happy with the January 31st proposal, but hoped it was an opening salvo. I believe this transaction is bad for competition. Then he was asked whether Sony's meeting with the UK regulators in summer of 2022 was before or after Spencer's email. Jim Ryan says he couldn't recall. He says, we certainly had one meeting with the CMA over the summer. So he can't remember, I'm sure. I don't know how you mix up those dates. This is extremely important. It seems like it's the only thing they've been focusing on for the last year or so. So surprising you can't remember that. Now, when it comes to Starfield, he is not happy that Starfield isn't on PlayStation, but doesn't view it as anti-competitive. And of course, he has to say he doesn't view it as anti-competitive because from what we understand, PlayStation was in negotiations with Bethesda before Microsoft purchased Bethesda to make Starfield an exclusive on the platform. Xbox heard about this. They came in and said this can't happen, and they purchased Bethesda and purchased every other studio and IP that goes along with that to make sure that this type of stuff doesn't happen. And the reasoning they cited for this is because PlayStation was a hostile competitor doing things to make sure things don't show up on the Xbox platform. Xbox knew that they had to fight back. And this is how they fight back, by getting as much content as possible on their ecosystem for Xbox Game Pass and for the Xbox platform overall. Now, that's Starfield. And here is what Jim Ryan told Activision about him wanting the deal blocked. We heard about this stuff from Lulu Chang Mezrave saying that Jim Ryan just wanted to block the deal. We also heard about this last week in the court proceedings that were going on. And Jim Ryan confirms that he did meet with Bobby Kotick, and here's what he says. I told him, Bobby Kotick, that I thought the transaction was anti-competitive. I hoped that the regulators would do their job and block it. And then he was asked if he wanted to cover himself with an extended Call of Duty deal with Sony. And he says what Bobby wanted to do was cover himself by extending the marketing collaboration between Sony and Activision in the event of the transaction not proceeding. So Bobby Kotick wanted to make sure they had some sort of marketing deal in place in case this didn't go through. Bobby Kotick was there covering his ass no matter what was going to happen here. And then as we're going through, they're trying to push this deal through. Now, will that happen if this deal does go blocked? Will they continue marketing with PlayStation? That is yet to be foreseen. I know that the business relationship between the two companies probably isn't the strongest right now. I'm sure Bobby Kotick wants that golden parachute and he wants this deal to happen. But at the same time, we can't deny the strength of Call of Duty on PlayStation with the amount of money that makes both of those companies. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were be open to negotiating with PlayStation again if this deal does get blocked. But that would be, I would say, a rarer scenario, because you would think that they would probably go ahead and switch over to negotiating with Xbox and make some sort of crazy deal on the side, maybe putting it into Game Pass still. You never know. But it will be interesting to see what happens if this deal eventually does get blocked after the next couple of days. I mean, we will essentially know when the FTC is done. Now, the Sony email was back, and this email is about them admitting that this entire deal is not about exclusivity. And I'll read the email again. It says here, it is not an Xbox exclusivity play at all. They're thinking bigger than that, and they have the cash to make moves like this. I've spent a fair amount of time with both Phil Spencer and Bobby Kotick over the past day, and I'm pretty sure we will continue to see Call of Duty on PlayStation for many years to come. And this is an email between Jim Ryan and Chris Deering, who was the former CEO of Sony Computer Entertainment, discussing this entire deal. And Deering replies here saying, this deal would cement Microsoft as a player in mobile games. It strikes me as more of a king play than Call of Duty. And Ryan didn't disagree. Now, this is very, very interesting. It pretty much proves here that PlayStation, throughout this entire time, whenever we were hearing things pop up about Call of Duty, it being the most important game for them, and if they were to lose this game, their business would just crumble. We know that they weren't actually ever scared about that. They always believed that this was not about exclusivity. And they even confirm what Microsoft has been saying, which again proves here that Microsoft hasn't been lying about this, which I think a lot of people were questioning that for some reason, but it just makes complete sense that this has been a mobile play. And we even saw other emails from Phil Spencer come out talking about how this was a mobile play. And mobile gaming is the most profitable place in gaming. It's the easiest way to access people. Everybody has a cell phone, so it just makes sense for this to be a king play more so than a Call of Duty play. And Jim Ryan knew this right from the very beginning. Sony knew this right from the very beginning. And all of the arguments about exclusivity, Call of Duty, it being anti-competitive, them using Call of Duty to foreclose PlayStation, it was all a big lie. They knew right from the beginning that wasn't going to be the case. And I think it's proven with all of these emails. Now, they talk about Game Pass. Jim Ryan goes off on Game Pass. Says a lot of things that I don't think are actually true. But here is one of the things that he says here. He's talking about the importance of first-party content to fend off competition from Game Pass. He says, one of the reasons why we are investing massively in first-party development and publishing is to provide us with an edge against pressure on a historic business model. Having a business model where you own elements from top to bottom increases your ability to be self-determinant. And then a Microsoft lawyer asks, do you think it would be better if Microsoft kept Activision games on PlayStation? Jim Ryan says yes, I do. The lawyer asks, so you believe it's in Microsoft's best interest to make Activision games available on multiple platforms? Ryan said, no, I don't agree with that. Lawyer says, if you were running Xbox, would you recommend making Call of Duty and other Activision games exclusive to Xbox and PC? Ryan says, that's a hypothetical question that I don't wish to answer, and then says he doesn't have enough knowledge to answer the question. Obviously, they would be keeping it exclusive. Let's be honest here. If Call of Duty was being purchased by PlayStation, it would be exclusive to the PlayStation platform, and they would be doing everything they can to promote that. But this quote here is the most interesting thing I think out of this entire questionings that Jim Ryan went through. And he's talking about the historic business model. The historic business model being owning first-party content and then locking people to a console to be able to access and play the first-party content. And saying that they're investing massively in that to be able to provide an edge against the competition, which the reality of the situation is we all know, we've seen the numbers that, yeah, first party content is great. It does absolutely help in terms of getting people into your platform and into your ecosystem and stuff. But when it comes to the historic business model of locking people to consoles to play games, far more people purchase consoles for reasons other than first-party games. Far more people purchase consoles for third-party games to go play wherever their friends are, just because of the price of them compared to getting a PC or something. First-party games are not the main reason people do buy consoles. And I would say, although he's saying here that they are investing massively in first-party development, we just saw the last PlayStation showcase. And the last PlayStation showcase proved that they understand that their current historic business model is a thing of the past. They're making games as a service games. They are continuously adjusting, and they're going to continuously be adjusting their subscription-based model of PlayStation Plus. I wouldn't be surprised if all of these games as a service games from PlayStation land into the PlayStation Plus model or free-to-play, or there's something along those lines where it isn't a $70 game that you have to go out and buy. They are seeing that they need to be able to do more of that stuff to be able to continue to compete in the long run. And this deal here with Activision Blizzard is going to make it even harder than it currently will be for PlayStation to be able to catch up to what Xbox is doing with subscription and with cloud gaming, with the huge competitive advantage that they do have, which is putting the first-party games into the subscription service. I think more so than anything, why PlayStation wants this deal blocked is so that they can continue to charge $70 for their first-party games and then double dip on customers with the subscription model. Whereas with Xbox, they put them right in there. And I think PlayStation eventually will have to be putting their first-party games into PlayStation Plus. I know they keep saying they are going to. I don't believe it. I think there will be a point where first-party games are going to be coming day and date to PlayStation Plus, or very soon after the release. They're already sort of dabbling in realizing they need to expand out rather than just locking games full price to a console, with putting games on PC, getting into PlayStation PC, and even opening up the PlayStation mobile side of their business. They understand that they can't continuously rely on the historic business model, because if they could, if the market stayed, if the gaming industry stayed with the console wars only, PlayStation would always be ahead of Xbox, and they would be able to do things like spend money and just bags of money to make games don't show up on Xbox, with the hope that in the future that they would be able to actually get rid of Xbox. And the reason I say that is because there is a tweet going around, and it's a very interesting tweet, and it has to do with PlayStation's actual thought process when it comes to competition. And this is the tweet. And again, to be fair, people are spreading this tweet around, making it sound like this is something Jim Ryan said during this trial, but this is back from 2020. This is from a GameIndustry.biz article from 2020, where they're talking about how PlayStation 2 took the world by storm. So this is completely irrelevant to what is being said within this case, just because Jim Ryan didn't say this right now, but here's the quote. It says, "We targeted Microsoft from day one. We were ruthless. I'm not of this mentality anymore, but at the time, it was life or death as far as I was concerned. We had this expression in our business meetings, kill them right at the start and take no prisoners. When it came to Microsoft, it worked at least for the PS2, and it continued to work on PS3 and PS4, and it'll probably continue to work on PS5 because we drove piles under the strength of the PlayStation equals games concept at the stage when we were getting ready to take Microsoft on." So that's PlayStation's mentality. And I know they say here it's not their mentality anymore, but I don't believe that. I believe it probably still is. I mean, these are businesses looking to compete and to beat one another. But it is what is happening right now in the gaming industry is that Microsoft has come in and disrupted the market with Game Pass. And they're realizing that this, with the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, and PlayStation 4 era, where they were able to do that type of stuff, try to destroy them right at the start, put out all of this big first-party content, get people over to buying a PS4 and being locked into the PlayStation ecosystem, with, especially during the PS4 with digital content. They're losing the edge on that with Game Pass and with cloud gaming and Xbox putting first-party content in there. And this deal going through will severely hurt them in being able to keep that edge, which is why they want to block it. Now, Jim Ryan also said publishers don't like Game Pass. He says here, "I talked to all publishers, but they unanimously do not like Game Pass." And he doubles down on it, saying it's a very commonly held view by publishers. And the Microsoft lawyer asks, "So you had no reason to think Mr. Kotick would put Call of Duty on Game Pass if this transaction was not completed?" And Jim Ryan says, correct. So he believes that if this deal doesn't go through, Call of Duty will not end up on Xbox Game Pass, or that they would have never put it onto any subscription service, which honestly, if this deal was never going to happen, I would be surprised if Call of Duty went on any subscription, any cloud gaming, anything like that. But I think this is kind of backfires as an argument, because this deal is making the Call of Duty more accessible to more people. It is better for the consumers, which is why this entire thing of it being anti-competitive in ways and that it is bad for the consumer is crazy to me, because it almost seems like the FTC is just here negotiating for PlayStation. Because you actually look at the reality of what has happened. If this deal does go through, more people are going to get able to access Call of Duty at a cheaper cost, which at the end of the day is always better for the consumer when you're paying less money to access the same product. It's not like it's going to be a worse game, a degraded game. It's going to be the exact same Call of Duty for cheaper, because of subscription, because of cloud gaming that is being licensed out to, all of that type of stuff. So I don't know how the judge will look at this, but I think that this isn't like something that is in favor for PlayStation, just the way I see it. Now, next here, they talk about how Xbox beat PS5 sales for 3 months in 2021. Jim Ryan's confirming that Sony had some shipping constraints in 2021 and the Series X and S beat the PS5. So I don't know, maybe he's trying to play the victim/weak card that, hey, they can beat us if they want to. But I mean, the reality of the situation is, in terms of console sales, the PS5 is beating the Xbox. And I don't really foresee that ever changing this generation. One of the big reasons is because they have such a bigger stronghold in other parts of the world, whereas Xbox is mainly North America and the UK, where they do sell their consoles relatively well. But other than that, it's like in Japan, you have millions and millions that PlayStation is always going to beat Xbox by. And then finally, he ends it off here talking about cloud gaming, saying cloud technology will become a meaningful component of how gamers access games between 2025 and 2035. We're making significant investments in cloud in anticipation of it becoming a very meaningful way of how gamers access games. So again, they are adjusting their strategy. They know that cloud gaming is coming, and they are going to make it a major part of the PlayStation platform. We know PlayStation Now that they were there with, where you have to have a PlayStation Plus premium subscription to actually access streaming. And then we saw Project Q and all that type of stuff. So overall, Jim Ryan's deposition was kind of boring. He didn't even show up. He didn't say anything crazy here that I would say would make PlayStation look like a victim in this case at all. In fact, it really just kind of highlights that there really isn't anything that bad about this deal when it comes to it hurting PlayStation in a competitive way. I mean, they essentially admitted it really doesn't have anything to do with Call of Duty. They just don't want to have to change their business strategy, which they're going to have to keep adjusting especially if this deal does get passed. But I will leave the video there, guys. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up. If you're new, or hit that subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.
We'll be right back.